I'm going to start this video with a riddle, and you tell me what you think it is. What is big, small, cheap, expensive, well-supported, yet also terrifying, all at the same time? What is it? Any guesses out there? Well, that would be ExpressLRS. Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and today I'm going to show you the easiest way to flash ExpressLRS, because if there is anything that strikes fear into the hearts of every FPV pilot, it's those four letters. ELRS, or Extra Learning Required System. That's not actually what it means, but sometimes it feels that way. A lot of people are jumping on the ELRS bandwagon because of things like the Radio Master Boxer and all the new radios that we have available to us today, as well as all of the new receivers, because ExpressLRS receivers are itty-bitty. Yes, this is a full-size ExpressLRS receiver. It literally fits on the tip of my finger, just like that. And we can take these things out to ridiculous places, like 100 kilometers. If you check out Wesley Vardy's video he just did. 100 kilometers on this system. It is open source. It is cheap. You can get into this thing for a module and a receiver for less than $50 and put it in the radio you already have. But with everything comes a cost, and the cost for this one is the learning curve, because although there is a really good piece of software for making all of the firmware for your modules and radios and things, it's not quite as easy as something like Crossfire, that flashes from the module to the receiver. So you might be pretty confused the first time you do it. Now, what I will say is that once you've done this once, you've basically got it down. So once you get to the first time, you understand how to do it, and it gets exponentially simpler the second and third and 37th time, or however many quads you have, like I do. Because, you've already made all the files, and all you got to do is spend 30 seconds putting it on the quad. So just get through the first time. I promise it gets better. But I'm going to show you today the easiest way to do it. And before I do that, we have to go over some things you're going to need to get this done. And first and foremost, you're going to need a radio. Obviously, we need a radio. This is a radio link. This is my TX16S with the gigantic Radio Master Ranger module in the back. But this doesn't have to be your setup, because there are a lot of different ways to get ExpressLRS. Some radios like TX16S have internal built-in ExpressLRS modules. Mine's a little older, so it doesn't, so I have to put one on the back. And not every module is the Ranger. There are things like this Happy Model module. There's a bunch of manufacturers making this stuff. You'll also need a receiver, obviously, because you want to pick up the signal on your quad. And before you ask, no, you do not have to have a manufacturer-matched receiver and transmitter for this. Any 2.4 gigahertz ExpressLRS receiver can be used with any 2.4 gigahertz ExpressLRS transmitter. So just make sure you buy what you want to buy. If maybe you're buying into the Radio Master world, you've bought all Radio Master everything. That's perfectly fine. But I have a variety like this one here, which is a Flywoo. This is a Flywoo ExpressLRS receiver, and I'm going to be flashing my Radio Master Ranger with it. So this is a Radio Master transmitter with a Flywoo receiver. Just so you can see that you can diversify and not buy into all the same manufacturer's stuff. Some other things you're going to need for this are a laptop with Wi-Fi. That will be the best way to do this, because we will be using Wi-Fi flashing for this. And if you do not have a laptop with Wi-Fi, you can technically accomplish this by making all the files I'm going to show you and then putting them up in your OneDrive or Google Drive or something like that to get them on your phone, and then doing all the steps that I'm going to show you in the web browser on my laptop from your phone, because you can do that too. Your phone has Wi-Fi, or at least it should if it's not a flip phone. It is 2023. And last but not least, you're going to need ExpressLRS Configurator version 1.55 or whatever the latest is as you're watching this video. And if we go to this page, which is linked in the description below, you just scroll down and get the one you need. If you have a Mac, you want the DMG, obviously, and you can also get the zip file or ExpressLRS setup executable for Windows. And I prefer the executable. That's the one I'm going to get, the EXE. So download that, make sure you have a radio, make sure you have a receiver, and let's get into the next part, which is all the various ways you have to set the radio up. Because there are different radios. Like I said, there are internal module radios, there are external module radios, there are black and white screen radios, and there are color screen radios. But they all start the same way, and that is with a model. And if you don't know what a model is on your radio, it is the set of configuration things specific for a particular aircraft. In my case, I like to make one aircraft model called ExpressLRS, and all of my ExpressLRS quads use the same model. You can absolutely do that. There are some advanced features where you can have individual ones, but we're not going to dive off into that. So what you need is a model set up on your radio that activates your ExpressLRS module. If that is the internal module, you will want to set the RF module to internal if you have ExpressLRS internal. If you have external, you'll want to make sure it is set to external. And I'll show you on mine what that looks like real quick. So with my radio powered on, I'm going to hit the MDL key so you can see my model. I have this one called ExpressLRS because I share one model for all my ExpressLRS quads. Now, if you bought a Radio Master radio or something that already had ExpressLRS built into it, you more than likely already have a model on your radio that activates the internal ExpressLRS module, more than likely. If not, you have a radio that takes an external module and you plan on slapping it in there. And you've probably been flying with models already, like maybe you're using Crossfire or whatever. You can just make a copy of that model and then rename it to ExpressLRS. And then I'm going to show you in here where to go to change it so that you know how to do this. Because we want to go down to where it says internal and external RF. So you can see my internal RF is off because this one does not have built-in ExpressLRS, and my external RF is set to CRSF. If I did have an internal ELRS module, I would set my internal to CRSF, and I would turn my external off. So just make sure that your model that you copied or generated new has CRSF selected in the correct place. If you have a radio with built-in ELRS, it's going to be the internal module. If you have a radio with external module ELRS, it's going to be the external module. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, but the reason why we have to do that is because the module is not actually powered up unless we activate it this way. And we're going to need that module powered up in a second because now it's time to start up ExpressLRS configurator and start making firmwares. We're going to get all the files together to do this before we actually do any of the flashing, and I'm going to show you why that is. It's easier to get all your files together and in the right place before you go trying to flash everything up. So the next steps here are going into ELRS configurator, doing some firmware creation, and then getting a file on our SD card so that we can start up the Wi-Fi and all that stuff. And then at the end here, I'm going to show you how to actually flash the quad and the radio once we have all of the requisite software done. So let's jump over into ELRS configurator. And over in configurator, the first thing we need to do is decide what version we're going to flash. The newest is 3.2.0, but there may be some considerations for flashing something different. Because if you have a quad that has an SPI-based receiver, which means that it's not a traditional UART-based where it's tied to a serial UART port from the processor on your flight controller. It's an SPI-based receiver, which means it's built onto the same board, but they kind of just tied it directly to the MCU on the board, and it's not doing so much serial like all the rest of the world. Then you have to consider what version you are going to flash on your transmitter. Because SPI-based quads require a brand new version of Betaflight to get new ExpressLRS versions packaged in it. You cannot just flash an SPI-based receiver. You have to upgrade all of Betaflight to get the new versions of ExpressLRS in it, which kind of super duper sucks, right? Well, yeah, it does. But Betaflight 4.4 has the 3.x version of SPI-based support for ExpressLRS built in, but if you're running Betaflight 4.3.2 or something prior to Betaflight 4.4, most likely 4.3.2, then you'll have to flash version 2.5.1 to your transmitter module. That's as good as you can go. And you won't be flashing your receiver because it's built into Betaflight. Now, you can always flash your SPI-based quad to version 4.4 of Betaflight, in which case you will want to flash version 3.2.0 or whatever the newest 3.x version is to your receiver module to get the most out of it. But that does mean flashing Betaflight, and you're not going to be able to flash the receiver like we are on this Flywoo quad down the road because you can't flash just the receiver on an SPI-based quad. So just remember, you got to consider what version you're going to run. But for what we're doing here with my radio and UART-based receiver, we're going to be flashing version 3.2.0. And just one other consideration, although Betaflight 4.4 does have ExpressLRS 3.x support in it, At some point, ExpressLRS is going to come out with a 4.x version, in which case you probably won't be able to upgrade your module until Betaflight 4.5 comes out, or they do something funny to support the new ExpressLRS in that Betaflight. So, yeah, just know that if you have a SPI-based quad, it's going to be a little bit laggy. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to say that you have a UART-based receiver like I do, and you have, the transmitter. Internal, external, whatever. But let's build some firmware for both in this instance that is an SPI. So now that I know what version I want to run, which is 3.2.0 in my case, I'm going to go down here to targets and find my stuff. Now you can see there's a whole bunch of manufacturers. Like everybody's making this crap. Everybody's making this crap. But I am going to be flashing a Radio Master Ranger today. So I'm going to find Radio Master 2.4 gigahertz. What we want to make sure we don't do is flash something that says 900 megahertz, because 900 megahertz ExpressLRS and 2.4 gigahertz ExpressLRS are two different systems. So don't flash 900 megahertz versions of ExpressLRS onto your 2.4 gig gear. It will not work. It does not work that way. It doesn't just suddenly become 900 megahertz. I have seen questions asked about that. Not how it works. You want to stick to the 2.4 gigahertz if you're flying 2.4 gigahertz, which almost everybody running ExpressLRS actually is running 2.4 gigahertz, so there's a very good chance yours is, but double check if you don't know, and you will need to make sure you have a 2.4 gigahertz receiver if you have a 2.4 gigahertz radio. That's just the way it works. But let's pick Radio Master for mine, since my module I'll be flashing today is a Radio Master module. I have the Ranger 2400TX. Notice how there's a few other ones, the Micro and the Nano, and then we have a bunch of RPs and TXs and all this stuff here. There's a whole bunch in the list. Now, I happen to know that mine is the Ranger 2400TX, not the Micro or Nano. But if you don't know, then look up what you purchased. I know that mine is the Ranger full-size TX. The Micro or Nano would be in different use cases. So this kind of bay is a Micro JR bay, which is kind of what goes in most radios. And the Nano is more of a slide on the back kind of module, but pick yours accordingly based on what you have. Now, a couple of other things in here are full radios you can flash. So you notice the Zorro is in this list and the Boxer as well. Because the firmware for ExpressLRS, even though it's built into the radio, is just like any other module. It's just a module literally built into the radio. It's not like you have to slap it on the back or something. It's just in there, but we flash it the exact same way. So if you have the Boxer or the Zorro, if you have a Radio Master radio, then you would pick those as your TX. Just remember, this is the TX, not the RX. We'll be making RX firmware in a minute. Even though the RXs show up in the same list we're looking at right here, we're going to pick the TX first and build our firmware out for that. But like I said earlier, mine is the Ranger. So I'm going to pick the Ranger 2400TX since I am flashing the transmitter. And I'm going to want to make sure that I have this Wi-Fi box selected. You'll notice we have a whole bunch of things pop up. That's some stuff we're going to go through in a minute. But the first thing we want to do is click the Download Lua script option. And then we want to put that somewhere that we know where we're going to keep it. And what that Lua script does is actually lets us start up a thing on our radio where we can start the Wi-Fi for the flashing process and get this whole ball rolling. But in order to do that, we're going to have to take that Lua script we just downloaded and put it on the SD card out of our radio. Now, in theory, you can just plug your radio in via USB to the computer and hit the mass storage mode option when it pops up and do it that way, but it is actually always simpler to pull the whole SD card out of your radio and put it in a reader, because that USB option is super duper ridiculously slow. So I pulled mine out, and yeah, let me show you where to dump this Lua script so that we can get the radio into Wi-Fi mode when we get ready for it here in a minute. So with my SD card plugged in, I'm going to go to Scripts, I'm going to go to Tools, and you can see my ELRS v3 Lua here. I'm going to want to paste my ELRS v3 Lua I downloaded into this spot under Scripts and Tools inside of the SD card. And you may notice that you already have an ELRS Lua there. Maybe if you have the Boxer or Zorro, you already had it from the factory, because they do put that on there for you. What you'll want to do is delete the ELRS 3.LUA and the ELRS v3.LUAC, the Lua C script. Delete those two files and just paste your new one in there, because we want the most up-to-date one. This is for version 3.2. Although they don't change the LUA that much, we want to make sure if we're going to do this and get everything up to the newest firmware version, that we have the newest stuff available to us, right? So just put that one in there and then eject your SD card from the PC, put it back in your radio, and we're going to head back to the ELRS configurator to start actually making the firmware we're going to need. So now it's time to take a look at all these options. We're going to want to leave it in standard mode. We don't want to get into the manual mode thing. That gets crazy. We do need to pick our regulatory domain though. So if you are in the EU, you'll want to pick the regulatory domain EUCE 2400. If you are in the United States, you want to leave it on ISM 2400. And what that's going to do is change the output power your ELRS module is capable of. My ELRS module is capable of a ridiculous 2+ watts, which I never use. I only ever use like 250 milliwatts at most out of my module. But just the fact that I can get 2 watts out of it just makes me feel super special. So I like to have a gigantic module. Now, chances are that, you're going to be using an internal module because that's actually much simpler. And some of those go up to 1 watt. But if you're in the EU, it will limit you. Just make sure you pick the correct range here of the ISM if you are in the US, or the EUCE if you are elsewhere in the EU, because not everything is about the United States. Weird to say, but true. And the next thing you're going to want is a binding phrase. So if this isn't checked, go ahead and check it and put in a binding phrase. And you can see mine is carpet 2613 alert. And don't read into that. That's just something that I acquired from an old Comcast router at some point and just stuck with forever. It's not about alerting carpet. It's just about something that's in my head now, permanently burned in. And that's why I use it for my binding phrase. And just remember that if you decide to do something simple like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which I would not do, it's entirely possible that some other pilot on the line with you flying at some point, if you fly with others, will have that same weird, simple binding phrase. And that means that when they start their quad up and you have your radio started up and you haven't started your quad up yet, kind of a niche set of circumstances, their quad might actually bind to your radio. So you want to make this a unique binding phrase that nobody else is really going to have, within reason anyway. If you're not flying with 1,000 people, the variation doesn't have to be that great, but make it something unique to you, because that is what is going to bind our radio and receiver together. We're going to enter this same thing on the receiver side, and whenever they both start up, they're going to bind based on this phrase. So be sure to have a phrase that's unique. That way you don't accidentally get bound to somebody else's stuff for using something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or binding phrase as your binding phrase. Don't do that. Come on. Have some originality. But we do want a binding phrase in here. Now that that's set, compatibility options, you are inverted. That is checked by default. And the reason for that is that it is required with most models of radios. So unless you know for sure that you don't need an inverted UART, don't uncheck that. Just leave it alone. The extra data here, telemetry report interval, you can change that if you want to. It's not really that big a deal. I would say just leave it unchecked. The network auto Wi-Fi on interval, this will be how long it takes your module, your receiver, or your module to go into Wi-Fi flashing mode if you just let it set there. So we're going to leave that at 60. I believe that's the default as well. And then this next one is completely optional, the home Wi-Fi SSD or home Wi-Fi password. And what those fields do is let you connect your radio's module or even the RX module in your quad to your home Wi-Fi, which may be handy because I can show you in a minute here when we get to the Wi-Fi flashing portion. Whenever I start up my module, it connects to my home Wi-Fi. And inside of this page here in the configurator, it will actually list that as an available device for me to flash because it's connected to my home Wi-Fi. If that's important to you, if you want to be able to, down the road, manage your ELRS stuff better, you can put your home Wi-Fi in there and it will connect, and you'll get a pop-up in the ExpressLRS configurator every time you go to use it when your module is in Wi-Fi mode and connected to your home Wi-Fi, that it exists and you can click some buttons and target it if you want. But if you don't care about that, or you maybe don't have home Wi-Fi, it's not a big deal. And just so you know, if you do put the home Wi-Fi stuff in, but you find yourself needing to flash your quad in the field where your home Wi-Fi is not, it will default to as if the home Wi-Fi stuff was not put in there. So I'll explain what that means in a minute, because it makes a difference about how you flash the thing, if it's connected to your home Wi-Fi or not, because it will either get an IP address from your home Wi-Fi, or it will start its own little network and you can connect to it with its network if it doesn't have home Wi-Fi. But I like it. You decide if you want it or not. It does make things easier in the long run, especially if you have a bunch of ExpressLRS quads. And I can show you real quick what that actually does for you. Because down here at the bottom, you can see this says Wi-Fi device selection default 10.0.0.1. Because when we go to flash this thing, what's going to happen is it's actually going to pop up a wireless network that we can connect to, which I will show you here in a little bit. But we're going to go to this IP address, because if we're not connected to the home Wi-Fi, that's the IP address that it uses. But for now, we're going to go ahead and hit build. So I'm just going to build this firmware. It's going to verify the build system, and it's going to take a while. It's going to go through a lot of processes. And just a heads up on this as well, you will need to be connected to the internet, because it's downloading all of the firmware data in order to build this. Even though it is building it on your machine, it's pulling some information from the interwebs in order to be able to do it. So you need to be able to connect to internet to build this firmware. And once we get this firmware built, we're going to put it in a place. But it is going to take a while. And sometimes you will notice that it actually errors out. When you have never used the ExpressLRS configurator before, sometimes when you go to build like this, you will get an error about halfway through. And it's really annoying, and people tend to wonder why that is. Well, the best thing to do is close the ExpressLRS configurator and start it back up and try again. Because most of the time what's happened is the build environment, all the tools that your computer is pulling and installing to be able to build this firmware, just haven't all lined up yet. When you run it for the first time, it's still getting all that together, and sometimes the first flash will fail. So you just close the configurator, start it back up, run it again, and that build environment is probably done the second time around, and it builds. So just wait this thing out until it builds your firmware, and it'll pop up a little folder, and we'll want to move the firmware to where we want to keep it. And this is the folder it popped up, which if you look up here is a temp folder. So we can't keep it here permanently. We want to copy this file here, and we want to put it somewhere where we can more permanently take care of things. And the way I have mine laid out is I have a folder called ELRS Firmware. And inside of that, I have a bunch of different things. My Radiomaster Ranger TX, my Lua scripts, my Happy Model Pro stuff, my EP1s, RP1s, different models of things. I have a folder for each model of thing that I have. And inside of my RM Ranger TX, you can see I've already pasted my 320.bin file. But I have older ones too from last time I built firmware for this. So it's a really good idea to start yourself a little library of firmware. As far as the transmitters go, you really don't flash them that often. You really only flash the transmitter as often as a new version of ELRS comes out that you are interested in flashing. But when it comes to the receivers, you may have a fleet of different ones. Like this one's a Flywoo, and on the wall back there, I've got Happy Models and Radiomasters and probably a couple other things. So I just have folders with all the stuff, and I keep the firmware in it, because I'm going to show you how to do this the first time, but when it comes to doing it the second time, you can actually get by with doing it a whole lot simpler, because you don't have to build the firmware again. You just go to your firmware library from the last time you built firmware, and you repeat the very last step of the flashing process with that firmware that I'll show you later. But anyway, it's a good idea to make yourself a library of firmware of all the stuff that you've built and just keep it in a place where you know it. But you must copy it out of the temp folder, because once we close that temp folder, it is gone for good. And unless you build it again, you won't have it. So make a library of your stuff. It's the easiest way to do it. And now it's time to make our receiver firmware, which is basically the same process, but we're going to pick a few different things. So in the ExpressLRS configurator, where you just made your transmitter firmware, go down to the bottom, hit the back button, and it will bring you back to the front page of ExpressLRS configurator, where we can do this whole freaking thing again for our receiver in a little bit of a different way. And again, we want to pick the version for our receiver to match our transmitter. And since I did 3.2 on the transmitter, I'm going to do 3.2 on the receiver. In the device category, for mine this time, I have a Flywoo receiver. So I'm going to go find myself Flywoo 2.4, and then I'm going to pick the device, which there's not a whole lot of options here, but I happen to know it's an EL24P 2400RX. And you'll notice this pop-up comes up, and that looks scary, doesn't it? Because it's all yellow and poppy-uppy. Yeah, it does look scary, but it's really not that big a deal. Well, it is, but it isn't. What that means, and it's kind of nice the ExpressLRS devs have put this in, is that when FlyWoo made this receiver, they didn't actually send samples to the ExpressLRS team to validate functionality. So they just want you to know that FlyWoo has made this thing, but they haven't actually got it like certified by the ELRS team to be functional. That doesn't mean it won't work. It just means that there's not as much support for it. And that's just how it works with this FlyWoo quad that I have, because that's what they decided to do. But anyway, it's fine. Don't worry about the big orange scary thing. In this case, it'll be all right. Just know that there's a possibility down the road that some compatibility will not be there because they decided to skip a step and not involve the ELRS devs, even though the ELRS devs are super easy to involve whenever you do involve them. But let's just continue flashing this thing. And again, we're going to want to pick Wi-Fi for the flashing method and let it change up all the things. And it should pull some of this over from last time we did it. So the regulatory domain, if you picked ISM for your TX, you're going to want to pick ISM for your receiver. And the same thing if you're in the EU. If you pick the EU one, then you want to pick EU for this as well. The binding phrase, we want to make sure this is the same binding phrase that we put in the transmitter configuration. And then we get some compatibility options, which these things are normally not needed. So unless you know specifically that you need to put these things on, just leave them the way they are. Lock on first connection is on by default, and it just means that it locks on the first connection after binding and doesn't allow it to hop around and try to find another bind. Auto Wi-Fi on interval, again, set at 60 so that the receiver will go into Wi-Fi mode after 60 seconds. And you again have options to add your home Wi-Fi SSID or password. If you do the SSID, you must also do the password, otherwise it's useless, but you have options for that if you want it. And now that we have all that, just like we had the other one, we're going to go down and hit build. And you wait again for this to build, which won't be as long as it was for the transmitter. The receivers take far less time to build than the transmitters do. And the same thing, whenever this gets done, it'll pop up a folder with our new file that we want to put somewhere. And hopefully you took my advice previously and made yourself a little library of things. I have my Happy Models have a folder, my Radio Masters have a folder, my FlyWoos have a folder, all the other things have folders, and I just put the most recent versions of firmware in there so I can pick and choose so that next time I flash a quad, I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to go through this whole process and wait again because I have stored my firmware in a way that allows me to use it as a library. But anyway, I'm going to wait for this to finish, and when it pops up, we're going to move it. And there we go, it's popped up the 320.bin that we just built, so I'm going to right-click that and copy it, because we're taking it out of the temp folder, and go to my ELRS firmware library where I have a folder for FlyWoo, and I'm going to paste it over here so that we can keep it safely. And now that we have all the firmware together, it's time to actually flash the things. And we're going to start by flashing the radio, because that's the most fun. Now, there are a couple of ways to get your radio into Wi-Fi mode, and I'm going to show you the both of them, because my radio module does have a little screen on the back. So that means that I can use this screen to put my module into Wi-Fi mode, or I can use the Lua script on my radio to put the module into Wi-Fi mode. I'm going to show you both ways because one may be more convenient for you than the other. And then again, you might not have a module with a screen, or you might have an internal module where your only option is the Lua script. But let me just show you how to get Wi-Fi started up on your radio so that we can flash it. And then we're going to use my lappity top to do the flashing. So if you do have a screen on the back of yours like mine, you can normally hold a button or something like that to get into the menu. And then you can scroll through it, and you should have an option in here somewhere for Wi-Fi admin. And if you click Wi-Fi admin, see this TX Wi-Fi? That means the Wi-Fi in the module itself. If I click that, it says press to enter Wi-Fi update. So if I press this button again, it will start the Wi-Fi on my module. And there we go. It says ExpressLRS TX, ExpressLRS 10001, and it's got the Wi-Fi running. And that works if you have a screen on the back of your radio. But if you don't have that, then you have to use a Lua script. So let me show you that. And it is a little bit different if you have a color radio versus a black and white radio, but all the settings are the same. So I'm going to show you the button presses. I'm not going to use the touchscreen because you may not have it. Mine may look a little bit different than yours, but the functionality is all still there. And the first thing is to make sure you have the model loaded where you have turned on the internal or external ExpressLRS module of your radio, because the Lua won't load if you don't do that. If you don't have it turned to internal CRSF or external CRSF based on your radio kind, and you don't have that model loaded, then it won't actually power up the module and we can't get the LUA to run because it won't be actually talking to the module at all. But make sure you have that model selected that we talked about at the very beginning of the video, and then we're going to press the sys key. So pressing the sys key, it loads all my scripts, and the first one is the ExpressLRS LUA. I'm going to click to enter that one, and I get a whole bunch of options. I'm going to go down to Wi-Fi connectivity here, and I'm going to hit Enable Wi-Fi. And then it's going to say Wi-Fi running. Press RTN to exit. And now we just set the radio aside, and we're going to connect to this thing over Wi-Fi. It's broadcasting its own Wi-Fi network right now, and we're going to want to connect to it. Now, I did mention earlier in the video that you can do this with your phone if you don't have a computer with Wi-Fi connectivity. Let's say you built all the firmware on your desktop PC, and it doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection. Perfectly fine. What you'll want to do is move all of the firmware that you created, those .bin files, to your phone with Google Drive or OneDrive or something, and download them on your phone. And you can use your phone to connect to these Wi-Fi networks, and you can use a browser on your phone to do the exact same things that I'm going to show you how to do on my laptop. But just for the ease of use and, capturing this stuff, I'll be using a laptop, and I'm sure a bunch of you out there have a laptop or a desktop with Wi-Fi capability. So let's head over to my computer and let's get connected up to this thing now that the Wi-Fi is running. So I'm going to go to my Wi-Fi networks available to me over here, and you can see this ExpressLRS TX. Don't hit connect automatically. You really don't want that. You want to hit connect. So we're going to hit connect, and if it brings up and asks for a password, it's just going to be ExpressLRS, all lowercase. The password is just ExpressLRS. Newer versions may not ask you for that, but if it does, it's ExpressLRS. And then once we're connected to that, we're going to want to go to a web browser. I'm going to use Google Chrome for my use case. And we're going to want to go to http://10.0.0.1. And if that's confusing, let me show you how to do it. So in the browser, we're going to go to http://10.0.0.1. And it's going to come to this page for us where we have a whole bunch of options. Well, this is our module, so there's a bunch of stuff in here, but we're going to go to Update. And in Update, we want to choose File, and then we're going to go to the file that we made for what this is my Ranger module earlier. We're going to pick the 320.bin file, hit Open, and then we're just going to click Update, and we're going to let it do its thing. It's going to upload, and then it's going to update, and it should pop up here in a second and tell us it was successful. And after you get the green checkmark pop-up that says it's successfully flashed, you'll probably notice that you're no longer on the module's Wi-Fi. That's because it actually turns the Wi-Fi off after a successful flash. Now you can just hit the return button a couple of times until you get out of the LUA script, and you can go ahead and turn your radio off because now it's time to flash the receiver. And I will say this is a good time if you have multiple receivers to go ahead and flash all of them. It's much easier just to do them all. And when it comes to binding, you won't need access to the receiver if you have properly put a binding phrase in both the radio and the receiver module. So might as well get them all flashed up at once and just do a whole batch job of them. But let me show you how to get your receiver into binding mode, because that can be kind of tricky a little bit. And to get our module into flashing mode, we want to just start it up with a pack. And we're going to wait. You see that slow blinking blue light? I hope you can see it. That means this module is just in standby mode, not bound, not doing anything. And if you remember from when we did the firmware creation, we had that Wi-Fi on interval of 60. That meant it was going to take 60 seconds. It was going to wait 60 seconds before it enabled the built-in Wi-Fi network. Same thing's going to happen here, where it's going to wait 60 seconds, and then we're going to get a really rapid blink. And that really rapid blink means that we are running the Wi-Fi network and we can go connect to it. So I'm going to wait the 60 seconds and then show you what this rapid blink looks like. And hopefully you can see it because this LED is itty bitty. And hopefully you can see that in there. We have the rapid blink now, which means that the Wi-Fi should be enabled and we can connect to it. And looking in my available networks, we can see ExpressLRS RX, which is the receiver's Wi-Fi. So I'll hit connect on that one and let it get connected up. Takes a minute. And if you need a password for that, it will also be ExpressLRS. Now, the newer versions, the 3.2 versions, once you flash this, it doesn't seem like they need a password. In fact, it seems like you connect to them and they go straight to the web page for you, which is kind of nice. But versions prior to 3.2, which more than likely came on your Radio Master radio or your module or your receiver, they're probably running older than 3.2 versions. You will have to type in ExpressLRS as the password for the Wi-Fi network and go to a web browser and type in http://10.0.0.1. But if you're running the newest stuff, it's kind of nice. It pops up for you, and mine just popped up. And now that we've gone to 10.0.0.1 on our receiver, we can go to the same thing in the Update tab on it. We want to choose File here, and we're going to go find the FlyWoo file that I created earlier. There's my FlyWoo EL24P320, and we're just going to hit Update on this. And it will upload and update just like the module did. And congratulations, now you have flashed both your transmitter and your receiver, and in theory, everything should work. If you put the same binding phrase in both of these things, they should bind up just fine. In fact, that's what we're going to test now. I have my radio started up, just sitting here, but the radio is started first. Now I'm going to start the quad, and what I'm going to look for is a solid blue light after it starts up, because if the receiver is bound, we should get a solid blue light. Let's see. Oh, there we go. We have a solid blue light on the receiver back here. And that means we are bound up and good to go. So that means everything works. And now all you got to do is decide how you want to handle quad flashes in the future, because chances are you're not going to be flashing the module that often. The module is only going to get flashed when a new version of ExpressLRS comes out and you feel interested in doing it, which isn't going to be all that often. I probably do it a couple times a year. But when it comes to quads, you're building or buying quads pretty often, and you're going to want to flash those probably more often. So like I said, keep a library of all your firmware that you've built. That way, next time you get a quad that has the same kind of receiver, you don't have to go build the firmware to match your transmitter. You just go dump it on there. You connect to the Wi-Fi network and you flash it. Now, there is a consideration if you did the home Wi-Fi thing earlier though. And just a side note, if you decided earlier to do the whole home Wi-Fi thing and you get ready to flash this gear next time you want to update it, I just want to show you what it looks like, because you know how we connected to that Wi-Fi network and then we went to 10.0.0.1 and all that stuff. It'll be a little bit different if you decided to use home Wi-Fi afterwards, because it's not going to start up that little Wi-Fi network, and it's not going to be 10.0.0.1. It's going to be connecting to your home Wi-Fi. So when you want to go flash this stuff again, you're going to want to find it. And yeah, just go to ExpressLRS configurator. Let me show you what my transmitter module looks like once it connects to my home Wi-Fi. And if I just scroll down to the bottom, you can see this is my Radio Master Ranger version 3.1.2, because that's what it was when I did this. But it shows the IP address. So this is how they show up if they're connected to your home Wi-Fi. They show up in this list of network devices. But you can see that it doesn't transmit the ExpressLRS TX Wi-Fi network like it does if we have not connected to home Wi-Fi. This is the only way you can get to it if you've selected your home Wi-Fi. Now, there are still a bunch of other things about ExpressLRS that you need to consider that aren't flashing, even though now you're a pro at flashing and you'll never have a problem with flashing again, hopefully. You do it once and it normally sticks. It's normally an easy process after you've gotten through the first one. But there are some other things like the packet rate and the transmit power and how you want your telemetry and all kinds of other things about ExpressLRS that you might want to dive into. I'm not going to dive into them in this video because it's already super duper long. I'll just give you a couple pointers. I normally fly 250 hertz, which is more than enough for me. The higher your packet rate, the lower your range is going to be. So if you fly a higher packet rate, you may have to fly a higher output power. Whatever packet rate you decide to fly, make sure you go into Betaflight and apply the preset for that packet rate. If you go into the Betaflight presets and you hit RC link, you should find presets. I use the 250 hertz preset for mine because I do. And just to remind you again, SPI-based quads are a totally different beast than UART-based quads. If you're not running Betaflight 4.4, the biggest number of version you can run on your transmitter module is 251 if you're not running Betaflight 4.4. So just remember that, unless you're doing some really weird one-off firmware, which I'm not going to get into. But hopefully you're running Betaflight 4.4 quads on your SPI receivers, you're running UART on everything else, and you can run the 3.2.x versions of ExpressLRS. And you know how to do it now, and you've got a nice firmware library, and you've got it on your phone. And one other thing to consider, when you're out in the field, if for some reason you flashed your transmitter and you forgot to flash your receiver, but you did load all of your firmware onto your OneDrive or your Google Drive or Amazon Docs, whatever it is you use in iCloud, hopefully not iCloud, but maybe it's iCloud, whatever you have, you can absolutely flash this stuff in the field with just your phone if you want to. There's also some stuff in the SpeedyBee app that I'm not going to dive off into today. But needless to say, there are a lot of ways to get this done, but this is the way that I use, and I hope it works for you. If you have any questions about it or you run into any problems, feel free to hit me up on Discord. My Discord is full of people who just actually recently did this ExpressLRS stuff. A lot of them got the Boxer. A lot of them were very excited, and they had never flashed this stuff before. So there's a bunch of people in there that can help you out with those questions. I'll be there as well. And on top of that, ExpressLRS has a great Discord community. They are very, very helpful and responsive. So feel free to hop over there and ask your questions and leave a comment below with a question, or let me know in a comment below how you like ExpressLRS or why you might be moving to it, or if you just hate it because everybody says it's terrible to flash, because that's entirely possible too. And yeah, that's all I have. I'm not going to take your time anymore because this video has been ridiculously long, and I've actually been like really, really, really sick all day and for like the past few days. So I don't know how much more talking I can do. And yeah, I'm starting to sweat like a stuck hog. So yeah, we're going to wrap this thing up. Anyway, until next time, stay greasy. I'll catch you later.